Hello and welcome to Control Delete Tutorials. Today we're going to be looking at how to create how to 3D model a computer mouse. So hopefully you'd watch the other two videos. The first one covered creating a PC monitor, or I guess you could say any sort of monitor, and then the second video covered how to create your keyboard, and so this one's going to focus on how to create the mouse. So what I'm actually going to do is show you, in case you haven't done this before, how to bring this image into 3ds Max so we can use it for reference. So the easiest way that I'm going to go about doing this is I'm just going to drag out my rulers here, go to the move tool there, and I'm going to zoom in here just to kind of center this up. That way I can make sure the reference image is also centered up when I bring it into 3ds Max. And that's kind of neat. It's going to put that right in the center there. I'm going to go to my rectangle selection tool, and I'm going to start dragging out. I'm going to hold the Alt key and Shift, and this is basically going to make sure that my mouse is the image, when I crop this, is just going to be perfectly square. And that makes it easy because then when I bring the image into 3ds Max, I don't have to worry about the length and the width because they always have to be the same. So they can basically be any number. So I'll go up here and just say crop, and I'll save this as mouse reference. And this is just an image I pulled off of like a Google image search. So you can just search for any. Just make sure you set your image settings in Google or whatever search engine you use to large. That way you get one with a lot of detail to it. Okay, so I got that saved out, and I'm just going to go ahead and close Photoshop for now. That way we're not running both of those. And so I started with a new scene. I've already got mine set up to where I saved it as mouse in the same directory, and I'm going to open up this material editor. The hotkey for that is going to be M. So if I press M, and we'll see this pop up. And sometimes it takes a second before it pops up. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete what was in here before. So we're going to start out with a standard material type. So just drag that out. And I'm going to double click this just to activate it over here. And then I'm going to drag in a bitmap map type. So I'll drag that in, and it's going to let me browse, and I'll just go to my folder here. So I have all mine saved in references, and the one that I'm going to use is my mouse reference. Let's bring that in, and I'm going to drag this node into the diffuse color slot, and I'll just double click on this again. I'm going to show shaded material in viewport, so that's the little checkerboard with the little light bulb. And then what I can do is, I don't have an object in here yet, so we need to find an object that we're going to use. So I'm just going to create a plane, and I'm going to say, let's make this 100 by 100, and I'm going to set my segments here to just 1 and 1, and I right click on the spinners, which automatically sets them to their lowest value, either 0, or in this case it's going to be 1 because you can't have 0 segments. And I'm just going to change the color here so we can easily see any wireframe. And I have one other thing. If I'm working on a reference, I want to be able to see through the other side easily. So we're going to remove the back face from here. So to do that, we can just right click while the image is, or the object is selected, go to Object Properties, and we're going to check backface cull meaning to basically not draw. And I want to make sure this is set to by object. Sometimes it'll default to by layer, like that, and you guys will on your end see it to where you can't check anything. I'm just going to say by object and backface cull, and I'll press OK. And now as we go under here, we'll see that we can see through the back face side of our plane. I'm also going to go to my move tool, and I'm going to right click on these spinners here for X and Y. That way this is at 0, 0, 0, just because I like to work that way. Now if I open my material editor back up, you can see I've got this other node here, and I can just drag this out, and I can just hover over top of my plane, and there you go, it gets put on there. So now when I go into the top view, I can see the mouse. So in the previous video I talked about trying to figure out how many segments you want to start with any given object, and we want to do the same idea. So I had done it in Photoshop where I had drug down rulers, but we're just going to use this. So one thing that I want to make sure is that I'm not accidentally moving my reference around, So what I can do is, while I have it selected again, I can just go back into object properties and I can just freeze this object, and I don't want to show frozen in gray because it'll gray out this image, so I'll just uncheck that and say OK. And now I'm not able to select this object, so that makes it very nice, keeps me from messing anything up. Alright, so I'm going to go to box, and I'm going to start by just dragging out a box that is the same size here, and see how they have that shadow that shows up there? That's kind of annoying. So I'm just going to go to realistic and just put this in shaded view. The other thing I can do is, now that I'm working with reference here, I can hit Alt X on my box and it's going to make it see-through. It's X-ray mode. So Alt X, X-ray mode. If I want to go back, I hit Alt X again and it goes back to the normal shaded view. So I'm going to just have that on. And actually, I'm going to move this out of the way just for a second, and we'll go ahead and go out of X-ray view. So I can look at how I want to set up my mouse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create segments for where this rounded part and the wheel are going to be. So if I was to count from the edge, I would say 1, and we'll go to the middle, 2, 3, and 4 segments across. So I'll set my width to 4, and then going down this way, starting on this side, I'm going to have, we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll put 1 in the back here, 6, so we can kind of create this curve. And you know what? Yeah, 6 should be good. That should be, let's give us 8 so we can really create that curve a little better. So we'll go 8. And then as far as the height here, now I can't see the height of my mouse, but I can kind of guess that it's probably not taller than it is wide. So right now my width, let's say this is like 45 roughly. I'll just do 85. So if this is 45, then what I have here, 30 is probably good. So that's 15 less than it's here. So that should be pretty close. Let's see where 20 puts us. 20 is a little less than half. We'll go 25. All right. So that kind of gets us pretty close with the size. As far as segments on the side, I'll put 1. So we have 1 segment for the side of this. Alright, so I'm going to go into the top view, and I'm going to convert this object now to an editable poly. And I'm going to just make sure that I move this back to 0. And I'm not going to move it in as 0 here in the Y. Well, I guess I could. That way it's at 0, 0, 0, which I like. Now you're going to say, well, this has all been offset now. That's fine. If I go into element mode and I just move this down, then what that means is the object is still keeping its pivot point because I moved it in element mode. So its pivot point's still at 0, 0, 0 when we're not in element mode. Alright, so now I can go around and start moving some of these edges. So we'll zoom in here a little bit. And so here's my first one, and I'm just going to set that where the hole starts. This one's going to go to the center of the hole and the center of the mouse wheel. And then this one, actually will come down to about here, and I can inset this part. Let's finish moving these. So I think I did my next one around the circle here, and then these ones I'm just going to kind of space out a little bit. So I'll do this one where it's still kind of sunk in. Actually, I might come back this way just a little. This one will be where the mouse is the widest, and I'm just going to put this somewhere in between here and here, kind of in the middle. Okay, now we got to move these ones on the side. Now what's cool is I can double click these edge loops, so we can see those edge loops run all the way around. And let's change the color of this so we're not competing seeing our selection color. So normally I go with purple just because it makes it easy to see the wireframe and easy to see what I have selected. So if I select both of those, I'm going to hit Alt X again to go back. I want these to line up right along here. So to do that, I can actually use scale and change my pivot point type to selection center. And then I can use scale to move these both in at the same time, and it moves them in the same general amount. Okay. So that gets all of my polygons kind of lined up where I want them to be, or all my segments. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a modifier on here which is going to allow me to round out parts of my mesh and kind of change my shapes here. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use an FFD 4x4x4, and we'll see how this looks. So I'm going to just twirl this open, go to control points, which will allow me to select my points here. So I'm just going to scale these down a little bit, and I'm only scaling them from the X. So just to be clear, I'm only scaling them from the X here. I'm just kind of pulling that in, and then I'll use move. I'll move these back, and you can see how I'm kind of rounding out this shape. Kind of scale this out. And again, I'm only doing this in the X direction currently. Let's go a little wider here. Now we're just trying to get a basic shape here. And I don't like how that's being pulled in. So I'll leave that the way it is for now. I'm going to go into the left view, and that way I can kind of get that teardrop shape that you get with a lot of mice. So I'll just pull up this part here, and kind of pull some of these down a little bit. Let's pull that row back a little too. And I'll just exaggerate that a little bit more. Alright, let's see what we're looking at there. Okay, now the mouse that we had kind of curved in towards the top, so I'm going to take the just top ones here. I'm going to use scale. I'll do that to kind of pull these parts back in a little bit. And you know what? I'm going to do the same thing here. Let's go back to the top, Alt X. Alright. So that gets us pretty close to the shape that we want. I'm going to hit right click, and I'm going to convert this whole thing back to an editable poly, which is going to keep my changes with the FFD modifier. Now, I've done that, but it still doesn't quite have the shape that I want it to have. So something else that I can use is called soft selection. So if I select the edge loops here, and I'm just going to come down to soft selection, I'm going to use soft selection, and we get this fall off. So the fall off goes basically from red, which is what I have selected. This looks like dark orange, but it's basically from a warmer color to a cooler color. And that means the way I'm moving these around kind of happens a little more gradually and affects the areas around it more. So if this way kind of works better for you, then feel free to use this compared to using the FFD modifier. And I'm just going to kind of bring these back corners in here. Kind of round this out a little bit. And just going to bring these parts out. So you can see how the mouse kind of widens and then narrows. And I probably went a little too far before whenever I pulled some of this in. So I'm just going to grab the corners here. And if you're having a hard time telling what I'm selecting, I will apologize. I mean, I've been modeling for a long time, so I know that I was selecting these ones that are up top here. So that's what I was selecting. You can kind of see that there. I'll just pull these corners back out a little bit. And that should get me pretty close to what I need. Alright, so I'm going to turn off Use Soft Selection. And I'm going to turn my shading back here. Alright, so the next part, we had this area here kind of rounded out a little bit. So a way that I can do that, whoops, and I probably selected, I thought maybe I selected something I didn't mean to there. So I'm going to go to this side here, and I want to keep this general shape that I have, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I can move these without distorting it too much. So what I can do is use my constraints, and I can say move these vertices along these constraints. So I'm just going to go up to Edge, and if I just move these straight forward, you can see they stay along those edges that are there, which is handy. So I'm just going to bring those forward and do the same thing on this side. I'm going to bring these back just to round this out a little bit, and then I'm going to do the same idea, only I'm going to come inward with them on both sides. And I'm just going to bring this back just a little bit. Alright, so now I have the section here that I want to inset. I'll just turn Edge Constrain back off. So I'm going to use the Inset tool. Inset, there we go. And Settings. And yeah, it's probably far enough. And if you remember from my image, let me just hide this for 1 second. We can see that the areas here and here were thicker. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. So I can grab the edges again and go back to Edge Constrain. And I can move those forward there. And I can move these back. Now if I don't turn on Edge Constrain, this is what ends up happening. As I drag these around, I can drag them away from the mesh, which I don't want. I want them to stay along those lines that I had already set up. I'm also going to widen this just a little bit, so I can just select on both sides there and just scale this out. And I'm doing that because I noticed that the next part here kind of beveled in. So I'm going to go to Bevel. And normally Bevel is going to give me a result that's probably not going to be what I need. So normally what I do is I just right click on these spinners and reset the tool. And now I can say the first one just tells it how far to extrude. So I'm going to extrude in a little. Second one tells me how much to bevel. So I can bevel. Kind of like that. And then I'm just going to hit delete, which is going to, actually, instead of delete, I'm just going to extrude this hole down in a little bit. And that'll be where my mouse wheel ends up going. And I'm going to go into the top view here, Alt X, and I can kind of see through here, and I can see that this fits pretty well with how my buttons kind of look, so I'm kind of happy with that. Okay, so the other parts that I have are, I have the where I can click on the left click and the right click buttons. And if I can select this and I hit Alt X, I can see that that one lines up pretty close. I'm going to turn my edge constraint back on, but I'm going to just move this back. I'll move this back, and I'm going to move this forward, because that's where my buttons are going to be, and they kind of follow this curve. And I'll just move these ones also forward. just to give a little room there. Okay, so that gives me where my buttons are going to be. And if we look at this again, so I'm just going to go ahead and take this. Let's move it out of the way for a second. We can see that we have this rounded part that goes all the way around it. And it's all kind of inset a little bit, which I will end up doing. So what I'm going to do is I'll go back to edge constrain, and I'm just going to pull these points a little closer together because this part kind of rounded out based on the reference there. Okay, so that should get me pretty close to what I need for my buttons. I'm going to bring these in a little bit too, just so this is more round. Alright, so now I can do some inset. So what I can do is I can select where this button is going to be. So I'll just extrude that. Inset that. And that's going to be a bit too much, so I'm just going to bring this back. That's good. Just gives me enough room there. I hit the check mark. And then I'm going to extrude this up just slightly. I'll come up with it. And that's basically going to be my button. I'll do the same thing on this side. Select. My inset tool is going to be already set to the right number because I just used it. And extrude will also be set to the right number because I just used that. And that gives me my two buttons. Now, the back part here is also inset a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing, just so our mouse takes on the same features as the other one. And I'm going to use exactly the same number. Inset, and then extrude. And when I do that, what's going to actually happen here is I'm going to get this edge all the way around right here. So before I go much further, I'm going to go ahead and save as, and we'll hit the plus button so we iteratively save, so we don't save over our last file. And I'm going to look at turbo smoothing this. So if I turbo smooth, we can see that we might get a little bit too much separation around these buttons. Let me go ahead and just turn off my wireframe there for a second. So you can see how these are kind of like rounding out, and these gaps are a lot larger than I wanted them to be. Well, we can fix that. Doing something like that is basically called smoothing groups. So I can tell all of these polygons how to smooth and how to separate from one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one, and it's going to be my not smoothing group setup one, and this one will be my setup one. So I'm just going to hide this one for now, just so we can come back to it. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to go into element mode and select the entire object. So down here is where my polygon smoothing groups are. I'm going to just say clear all, and I'm going to set them all to the same group. So I'm going to set them all to 1. And I'm going to go to polygon mode. That way I can select what it is I want to select. So I'm going to select the entire top here, like that. And I'm going to click on the grow button to select the side here. And I'm going to tell it, you're not in group 1, you're going to be in group 2. I'm going to click shrink, and I'm going to tell this top part, you're not in group 2, you're in group 3. So I can separate these, and what happens is it changes the shading on these objects. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to select, and I can actually get both here because these are not touching. Even when I click grow, they aren't touching together, so I don't have to worry about them smoothing weird. So I'm going to say, okay, you are not in group 1, you're in group 2, and I shrink my selection, whoops, and I'm going to put these just like this one in group 3, and I don't have to worry about it blending anything because they're not touching. Okay, just to show you again kind of how this works, I'll select where I'm going to have the hole here. I'm going to say grow and grow, So I'm going to select all of this, and we'll go ahead and we'll just do group 4. It doesn't really matter because, again, these aren't touching any of the other groups, which is important, but just so you can show that we can use different numbers. I'm going to say shrink, so now this will be the only part in group 4 when I say this is in group 5, and I'm going to hit shrink again so it only gets the bottom. I'll say that one's in group 6. Now we have one more group to do, which is the entire bottom of this. So if I go into my left view, and I'm just going to go ahead and select and deselect everything here. That way I have just the bottom selected. And I think I stopped at group 6, but since this part isn't touching, I could do group 2. It doesn't really matter, but we'll just go group 7. And the numbers are arbitrary. Just we don't want any of these to touch is basically the main point of it. Okay, so if I go back to Turbo Smooth, this is partially going to fix the problem, but not completely. And I'll show you why. So if I turn on Turbo Smooth, this is what it would look like normally, where I'm getting that issue that I don't want. But if I come down here to Separate by Smoothing Groups, I get a different result. Now I'm still getting what I wanted there, but I'm keeping this crisp edge that I wanted. Actually, this is pretty close to what I want, except I'm still getting this rounding here around the buttons. What else I'm getting if I turn this off and on, okay, so right now these are in separate groups, so it's not softening those edges. It's not trying to blur them together. So you can see the difference there. But I'm still getting this rounding, which I don't want. So what I can do is come back, and I can tell it to basically, this one is in group 2 and this one is in group 2. So what I can do is I can come in and I can say select by smoothing group. I'm going to say select number 2. That's all these. So what I can do is if I go to the top view and I look at this, I can say, so I'm deselecting these ones that are on the sides here and the ones at the top, and that should actually will get the ones here as well. So that means that these will be, and we'll just put them in group, let's say we've already used most of our numbers on the top row here, so we'll use number 8. So they're going to be in a completely different group. And then this one and this one, I don't want to leave in group 2 because actually it might be, no, these ones are in group 2 still. Yeah, so I'm going to select these and I'll put that in group 9, let's say. Okay, so we go back to our Turbo Smooth. And so now we keep these crisp or hard edges where we want them to be. And the bottom, if this again is turned off, the bottom gets all rounded and mushy. We don't like that. And the buttons change. Now this might be the way you want it to look. I'm just saying that I don't. This is what I want it to look like. Now obviously I didn't put this little button in the top. I'm not really worried about that for what I'm doing. It's something that can always be added back in, but you know, this is fine for the demonstration that I'm doing. But I need the mouse wheel. So that's easy. We can use a torus. I'll just go to my left. Actually, I'll go into my top view. I'm going to click and drag out from here so we can see this is the torus being created. And we won't be able to see it just yet. Okay. So I'm going to just rotate this 90 degrees. And I want to make sure that it fits here. So I need to change my two radii? I don't know. So the one changes the radius around the, I guess if you want to call it a donut, kind of looks like a donut. And now I can just go ahead and place this down into the mouse. Let's bring that back up a little. And I'll change my radius again. Just kind of move that around. There we go, we can use that. And then I can either parent this to the mouse object, so let's go ahead and just name this mouse. And mouse wheel. And I'm going to parent the mouse wheel to the mouse, which puts it underneath. That means if I move the mouse, it moves the mouse wheel. Okay. And that's a very quick way of going about kind of modeling this. Now I didn't attach them together, I just simply moved. Let's move this back and we'll unfreeze all. I'll just get rid of my reference out of here. So I'll go to Save As, hit the plus button. I'm going to unhide all, and we'll look at these two objects. So I'm going to put the Turbo Smooth back on this one, just so we can see the difference. Okay, so this one keeps its crisp buttons. This one, the buttons get all mushy. This one, the bottom of the mouse, which should be flat, is getting rounded out. So we'll just delete that one. As far as putting in, a cable, typically if I'm going to, I'm fine with just a wireless mouse, but if someone wanted to know how to do the cables, we can go into Shapes, Line, and a line basically works like the path tool in Photoshop. So I can click, and I could click and drag. And it's going to right click to finish the tool. And I'm going to select this vertex of the line. I'm going to right click and just set it to a Bezier corner, and that allows me to change the handle here. I'll just scale this handle down a little bit. That just makes it so the bottom part of the path here just comes straight and lines up with this. Then all you have to do is I can go to the rendering and say enable in renderer, enable in viewport. And we'll take our end of our mouse here and just move this up into the center here. And then I'll just change the thickness here. And that basically sets up the chord that I want to use. Okay, well, that does it for this tutorial. Keep a lookout for the next tutorial, which will be the final tutorial in this series, where we're going to be making the PC tower. Should be relatively easy based on doing what we did with the keyboard and the monitor and the mouse. It's going to be a lot of the same tools and a lot of the same setup, but just keep an eye out for that tutorial, or you could always subscribe. That way when I get that one put up, you'll get an email letting you know that the next tutorial is up. So thanks for watching, and like I always say, just kind of share this video if you think it'll help somebody, or if you like this video and you found it informative, please give me a like. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.